call this meeting of your Newark City Council to order. Jen, please call the roll.
Mr. Fennell? Ms. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Labutus?
Here.
Mr. Lang?
Here.
Mr. Marmee?
Present.
Mr. Rath?
Here.
Mr. Barker?
Here.
Mr. Blake?
Here.
Mr. Bowe?
Next, if you stand for the invocation by Mr. Labutus, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, as we come to prayer this evening, we take a moment just to pause, clear our minds and clear our hearts of things from the past few days, past few weeks. As we come to you, we admit that some of us are scared, some of us are worried, some of us are concerned. I just ask that over the next few moments, next few weeks, that we would look to you for peace and understanding and patience. I just ask you to be with our nation's leaders, our state leaders, healthcare officials, first responders, and those that are dealing with this pandemic on the front lines. Just be with us this evening as we discuss the business of the city and bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Labutus.
Next on the agenda, we have caucus. That's the time for council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything, Mr. Marmee?
Yes, I'd like to excuse Mr. Fennell.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Marmee, second by Mr. Blake to excuse Mr. Fennell. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Next, we have the minutes of our March 2nd, 2020 meeting. And do we have a motion to approve those? Motion by Mr. Labutus, second by Mr. Barker. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. We have 4 reports this evening from standing committees, one from finance, one from service, one from capital improvements, and one from personnel. Without objection, those will be received and filed. We have 1 report from city officials this evening from our auditor, the operating report for the period ending February 29th, 2020. That will also be received and filed. We have 3 communications this evening, all from the Ohio EPA. Division of Surface Water, public notice and draft plan to approve long-term control plan, and Division of Surface Water also, again, public notice of Beach Road in New Albany, Ohio. Without objection, those will be received and filed. Do we have anyone for citizens' comments tonight? Seeing none, next we'll go to ordinances on the second reading.
Ordinance 20-10 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Lang, an ordinance amending the senior automotive mechanic equipment operator of the Department of Public Service, Division of Street Maintenance and Traffic Control.
You've heard the second reading of 20-10. What is your wish?
Mr. President, I will move that we adopt ordinance 20-10.
Motion by Mr. Bubb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lang.
Good point.
Is there any discussion on 20-10? Seeing none, Jen, please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bowe?
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Next on the second reading, we have 20-11.
Ordinance 20-11 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Lang, an ordinance amending the position classification, pay range, and department authorization tables of the City of Newark Department of Service, Division of Parks and Cemetery by creating the classification of grounds maintenance worker and setting the compensation therefore.
You've heard the second reading of 20-11. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Bubb.
I'll move we adopt 20-11.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bubb, second by Mr. Barker. Is there any discussion on 20-11? Seeing none, Jen, please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bowe?
Yes.
20-11 passes 9-0. Next, we go to ordinances on the first reading, 20-12.
Ordinance 20-12 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Marmee, an ordinance changing the zoning classification of certain real property generally described as southwest corner of Thornwood Drive and James Road, parcel tax ID number 052-216696-00.000, 054-218136-00.000, and 054-218136-00.001. City of Newark, Licking County, Ohio, from that of LB Limited Intensity Business District and LI Limited Industrial District to MFR Multifamily Residence District zoning code of the City of Newark, Ohio.
20-12 will be referred to the Planning Commission. Next, on the first reading, we have 20-13.
Ordinance 20-13 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Marmee, an ordinance authorizing and directing the mayor and the director of public service to execute the supplemental revenue sharing agreement between the City of Newark, Ohio and the Newark City School District attached hereto to clarify payments with respect to municipal income taxes established in existing tax increment financing agreements and revenue sharing agreements.
20-13 will be held to our next meeting. Next, we have 20-14.
Ordinance 20-14 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, an ordinance amending the pay range of the position of clerk of council within the City of Newark.
20-14.
Mr. President,
Mr. Bub.
I will move we waive the 2-day reading rule on 20-14.
Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Bub.
Second.
Second by Mr. Marmee. Mr. Bub.
Yes, Mr. President, this will put everything in place so this position can be filled. Thank
Jen?
you.
Thank you, Mr. Bub. Jen, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived, Mr. Bub.
I will move that we adopt ordinance 20-14.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Bub.
Second.
Second by Mr. Marmee. Is there any discussion on 20-14? Seeing none, Jen, please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
20-14 passes 9-0. Next, we'll get a resolution on the second reading, 20-11.
Resolution 20-11 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Lang, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 20-11. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to adopt Resolution 20-11.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bub. Any discussion on 20-11? Seeing none, Jen, please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
20-11 passes 9-0. Next, on the second reading, we have 20-13.
Resolution 20-13 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, Mr. Labutus, Mr. Lang, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 20-13. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Lang?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 20-16,
13.
13, sorry.
Motion to adopt by Mr.
Second.
Lang.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rath. Any discussion on 20-13 or 16? Seeing none, Jen, please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
20-13 passes 9-0. Next, we move on to resolutions on the first reading, 20-05.
Resolution 20-5 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Marmee, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service for the City of Newark, Ohio to enter into purchase agreement for the purchase of two 2020 marked SUVs for the Division of Police.
20-05 will be held at our next meeting. Next, we have 20-16.
Resolution 20-16 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
20-16.
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on Resolution 20-16.
Second.
Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Marmee, second by Mr. Barker. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is some overtime dollars that we need to get into the fund immediately so we can pay those out.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Jen, please call the roll vote on waiving the 2-day reading rule.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
2-day reading rule is waived. Mr. Marmee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Make a motion to adopt Resolution 20-16.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee, second by Mr. Barker. Is there any other discussion on 20-16? Seeing none, Jen, please call the roll vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
20-16 passes 9-0. Next on the first reading, we have 20-17.
Resolution 20-17 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
20-17 will be held to our next meeting.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on 20-17.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on 20-17.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lang. Mr. Rath.
Mr. President, our paving engineer has told us that he is unable to figure out what roads need to be paved until he knows what roads or what monies he has to spend. Spring is rapidly approaching. We'd like to send him a message of what finances are available as soon as possible. That's why I'd like to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Jim, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bug?
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Rath?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 20-17.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Rath,
Second.
second by Mr. Labutus. Is there any other discussion on 20-17? Seeing none, Jim, please call the roll to vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bug?
Yes.
20-17 passes 9-0. Next on the first reading, we have 20-18.
Resolution 20-18 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee?
I make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on Resolution 20-18.
Motion to waive the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Marmee, second by Mr. Barker. Mr. Marmee?
Thank you, Mr. President. With 2017 being expedited, this has to be expedited in order to have the funds to do 2017.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Jim, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bug?
Yes.
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Marmee?
Thank you, Mr. President. Make a motion to adopt Resolution 20-18.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Marmee, second by Mr. Rath. Is there any other discussion on 20-18? Seeing none, Jim, please call the roll to vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Barker?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bug?
Yes.
20-18 passes 9-0. And finally tonight, on the first reading, we have 20-19.
Resolution 20-19 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Marmee, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to advertise for bids and enter into contracts, subject to the appropriation of funds for various construction projects.
And 20-19 will be held at our next meeting. And that concludes our legislation tonight. Thank you. Next, our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Do we have anyone? Seeing none, anyone, any city officials? Our Honorable Law Director.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mayor Hall.
Yes, some people wanted a couple updates on a few things. Today I was asked to join in a conference call for the Licking County Board of Health, as were most mayors and managers throughout the county, with some first responders. To be honest with you, Joel, really there wasn't any new news that you haven't heard, since we've been pretty inundated with news. But he did confirm and said more than once that there are no confirmed cases in this county yet. At the same time, he did say they're preparing with, which will be likely the first confirmed case one day. So I think, everybody somewhat knows the situation at the hospital. Certainly if you think you need to be tested at the hospital, you first got to go back and get a referral from a doctor. So that's kind of critical that way. But they're putting in for supplies. I think they're really answering a lot of questions. There certainly were questions from some of the smaller communities across the county, I think. If you know, we operate with about 370 employees and about 24 departments and maybe 12 locations. So this is something we've been working on from last weekend to now, pretty heavy. So no real news there. Certainly I think everybody is aware the governor talked about delaying voting. So there was to be no voting tomorrow in person, but they surely pushes out for absentee voting. And short of a judge interjecting that, I guess in the next whenever, we'll see how it happens, but June 3rd is that new date. They've cut it down to smaller groups of 50 or less. But I'll probably spend just a minute here about what's going on in this building. I think most of you have gotten updates, and so our first thing is to keep our priority is to keep our employees healthy so they can do the job to help the citizens how they need to. So that is critical and not always easy with the amount of people coming and going in this building. But I want to give kudos to all our employees and all the department heads and the directors have done a phenomenal job to kind of lock this place down a little bit and make it a safe environment in many ways. I think the fear that most of our departments have is what happens if someone gets sick and you do not have your employees. It's very, work can't get done. It's going to be very tough. I appreciate you coming together tonight to pass some legislation. These meetings are important to keeping the city rolling. When you know tax preparation in person anymore, and I've been talking all over the weekend, probably on the phone constantly, Friday and Saturday and Sunday with the department heads, and I asked them, what do you guys need and what do you want? And they've done some great things to still offer service. So, thank gosh we've got a hole in the wall on the west side where people can drop tax returns and they can drop them off and still get them prepared. We know we're down to the crunch time, although we anticipate the IRS extending that date from April 15th. They haven't declared that date yet. And they say it's somewhere between June 15th and October, but they still have to declare that date. So until that's done, this department next to us, our income tax department, has to operate under those rules that come down from the state and the federal, really, at the end of the day. We're looking at our high-risk employees and really seeing if they can work from home. We also have some that have some young children. So we have some people doing some split time that are working later in the evening. The husband works in the daytime. The wife, in this case, is working here in the afternoon and the evening, and they can take care of their child that way. I kind of surely thought that was nice. If I had some young children at home, I think I'd want to be home with them instead of sending them out somewhere. We know that probably daycares are going to be closed next, so it probably isn't a solution in a long term or even a short term. So I think getting our employees, and we have the technology and we have a whole lot of things we can do with our people, which is great in a case like this in many ways. So, questions of anyone? Again, we're in day with a lot of news. I think you're probably all abreast of it very well. I was nice to hear from Joe. There was no confirmed cases. I heard over the weekend there might have been one. There was a story written that there was potentially one, but he really said it a couple times. There are no confirmed cases yet. So, but I think no different than anything else. We know it's coming. We're just trying to keep it at a minimum in many ways, and can't reiterate enough to keep in small groups and try to stay home, and but still try to patronize the restaurants with carryouts and all those kind of things, because it's definitely going to make a financial impact. There's going to be a delay. We're surely aware of that in this building and understand that in the city a little bit. It's going to put a little twist into finances. So it's going to be definitely a delay in cash flow timing, but is it in the long run? Don't know. Favorable time, this is tax collection time. A lot of people file their taxes. That's not a bad thing. We usually have a little extra cash this time of year for cash flow, so it's not a bad time for that if there's ever a good time for it. But I would say the biggest thing is we worry about our elderly and those at risk, and that's something we really have to be cognizant of so much, tremendously, because how it could affect you or I versus somebody in their 70s or 80s or 90s, or somebody that's had a transplant, or somebody that has emphysema or something. That's the criticalness that we don't ever want to overlook. So, questions? Yeah.
As far as collections, approximately what percentage do we have in at this point? Because if they extend that date,
right,
will it create a cash flow at that point?
I can't answer that, but I'll talk to Barb tomorrow and I'll get that for you and let you know on that. The other thing is that we are, timing wise, we did get our first of 2 payments from the county. The timing, it comes in about right there, or we're just close to it, I should say, from the 3rd week of February deadline for property taxes. So again, that's, if you think about property taxes, again, they're paid, you pay them twice, we get that from the county twice. So it's real nice timing for that. There's going to be no delay to that. That's for certain in many ways. If you want to think about really this delay, net profits tax is all based on 2019. So that wasn't affected by this in income tax collections. Right. It's nice to see a lot of employers are still offering jobs for people. I mean, there's people working jobs, just like I said with us, just at home or in a different location. They're still going to get a paycheck, so they're still going to pay income tax. So the real point is the closing the restaurants and some of that is going to be, there's going to be an impact off that. I don't know, we're likely some of the construction jobs, and it surely isn't going to affect our 4th Street project that will be starting up. It's outdoor work. It's all good stuff for the fire station or things like that, which is good too. There's income tax collected off that, so not a bad thing. So, it may not be as bad as what we think, but it's going to be something. So I'll try to keep you updated, and I'll talk with Barb close, and we'll see. If there's some issue, I'll let you know, but I'll still let you know how we compare to prior years. Any other questions from anyone? Yes, Chairman?
Jeff, has there been any discussions about suspending water shutoffs?
We did, and I want you to know that each department, as I talked to them over the weekends, and I will say again, I'll give them kudos because, you know, weekends we usually leave everybody alone and they get to enjoy, but they all answered the phones when I called. We had good conversation. They each did a press release, and the advocate truncated that press release a little bit. They have it listed. So the press release out of the water department is that we will keep the water on. So, you know, it's not, we don't anticipate. What I do want to make the statement with that, I want people, it doesn't mean they don't have to pay, and it doesn't mean that it still won't accrue. So normally you would go to shut water off if someone is non-pay after going to the third month. We're going to look at that on an item basis and not do that, but that doesn't mean they're free to not pay. And I just want to be sure, meaning, you know, in the future. I just don't want people to take advantage of that and then they end up in a worst case 6 months from now because they have this outrageous water bill. It's just something I want everybody to be aware of, our citizens a little bit. It just doesn't mean there's free water flowing, but we are cognizant that water is an important ingredient to cleanliness, and that's something. So it follows suit of most communities around, and we fall right into that. So the water department's front office is closed. The walk-up window you can't pull up to now. It's a walk-up window, and there's a night drop, and there's online payments. There's plenty of ways to do that, and we've had that. Police department the same way. There's a couple phone numbers that ring right into the police department if anybody's got any questions, and I think we can do an awful lot of still the same business in many ways without face-to-face and touching people. So, but the answer, we're leaving the water on. So at this point, we will adjust this. I was on. We talked with the courts quite a bit today. I think you'll see tomorrow, and really, Marcia Phelps put out a nice press release, and we talked with the judges. I talked with all of them today, quite lengthy. They are going to postpone trials. They're going to do as much as they can do, and I was very grateful for what they've done because it's a fair amount of the foot traffic that comes into this building. And we're going to reopen the side door for probation visitors to take it down with a security down below checking them out so they're not coming through the front door and using the elevators and some things like this. So we're doing quite a few changes in the building itself for this short term, hopefully. Short term one way or another, no matter how many months it is. And I thought everybody was very receptive to that, and I appreciate the judges making those decisions, and surely under the advisement of our law director sitting to my right here, what we can and can't do. So as I would say, knock on wood, with what's going on right now, I'm pretty happy with the status of the city and what we're able to do in the situation. 40 years ago, you went at the technology and you just, you know, there wasn't, you couldn't, they had to be in here touching paper to get things going. Now we can put some people remotely, especially those that are higher risk, because that isn't a good story in many ways. So, any other questions?
Anyone else?
Good. Thank you, everybody. And you know, obviously, we're always at the end of the phone. If anybody's got questions, let us know or email. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Goss, did you want to make a comment after I heard you?
Thank you for letting me serve as a public.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad you could make it. Ms. Hall.
I'll pass, thank you.
Mr. Harris.
Looks like we're going to be voting tomorrow. I think we're voting. So.
Yeah, they
All right,
just
they jammed
denied. Yeah, he was
the
denied.
judge, overturned it, so we'll have that pass.
Judge overturned it, so we're probably voting tomorrow.
We are.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Labutus.
I'll pass this evening, thank you.
Mr. Lang.
Yeah, just say keep an eye on that overnight because I think there's appellate options, so we'll see what happens, but hopefully we'll go ahead and vote tomorrow. Also wanted to mention Yost's comments today allowing us to meet digitally, so we're looking into that, and hopefully in 3 weeks we will not all be sitting here. We'll be able to do some sort of digital meeting that'll be open to the public and accomplish all the things we need to accomplish without actually physically needing to get together, as much as I love being around all you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. So 8 of us will be here. Mr. Marmee?
Finance committee meeting of some kind, probably on the 6th, so I need to call that.
Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Mr. Rath?
I'll call a service committee meeting of some kind. And I did want to give a shout out to a couple of local businesses. I know we've got businesses that are going to be feeling a lot of hardship. Not only the businesses, but the employees as well. But two local businesses that I wanted to talk about. One was the dairy aisle, And whether that's the one on East Main Street, Church Street, or 30th Street, all three of them are doing the same thing. With kids being home from school, they are offering free lunches to kids from 11 to 12. They have to be present, so the parents can't go in and say, hey, I got 6 kids at home, we got to bring the kids to them. But nonetheless, free lunches from 11 to 12 during the week. I talked to the people on 30th Street today. They said they had a pretty good crowd today. So nice of them to do that. And then I also want to mention the Dank House. And I just thought this was a great example of stepping up and being a leader in a time of challenge. And what Dank House is doing is, as you know, that's a brewery. They don't serve food there, but they have food trucks there on a regular basis. They have opened up their parking lot to all of the local food trucks. I don't know who yet. They haven't put out a schedule yet. But they've opened up their parking lot to local food trucks. And they're going to have a variety of food as well as their beer available for pickup and delivery. I just thought that's a great opportunity to give those food truck vendors an opportunity to maybe recoup some of the money that they're going to lose with all of the shutdown, and a great way for a company to step out, lead, and make the best that they can out of a bad situation. So I wanted to give them kudos. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Mr. Barker?
I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Mr. Blake?
I'll pass.
And Mr. Bell?
I will pass, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Well, our next meeting will possibly be April 6th. I'm not sure whether we'll be here or virtually or something. We will be certainly letting you know when we have it figured out. We will want to make sure that the public can, Mr. Costa and the rest of the public, can also either view it or somehow see it. So we'll make sure that that happens. Again, I would just say watch the Advocate or the local radio stations. We'll have some sort of announcement if we don't have our regular meeting here. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Labutus, second by Mr. Barker. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Or same sign. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.